first question in spirituality when it comes, that question has to be, who am I? You cannot intellectually understand any of this. That's why I say, Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. ना मन हो, ना बुद्धि हो, ना अहंकार हो, ना चित्त हो, ना जिह्वा हो, ना नाक हो, ना कान हो, ना आँख हो, ना मुंह हो. I am ever prevailing consciousness. That's what Nirvana Shatkam tells you.
What is the biggest myth about yoga that people believe right now?
The biggest myth is yoga makes you feel very good. Essentially, in the traditional form, was not designed to fight illnesses or diseases.
While the awareness of the world is also growing, the chaos in the world is also growing. What is actually happening with our world?
This is nature, Gayatri ji. We say sansar is enjoyed by humans. I'm sorry, but created by who? There's always a subconscious at play. So who do you think is the controller? Who do you think is the enjoyer? We are not.
Have you ever had this weird thought of leaving all of this and just going off to the mountains?
Many times.
If you're a spiritual seeker, then this podcast is going to help your spiritual journey on a completely different level. Grisha is not just a yoga teacher, a yoga instructor, but somebody who understands yoga on a much more deeper level to be able to tell us that yoga is not just about the asanas, but also about our union with the divine. Her understanding, her in-depth knowledge, and literally everything that she's spoken in this podcast was truly, truly mind-blowing. I really hope each one of you watches this podcast till the end to understand the energy that each one of us carry inside of us and how this beautiful spiritual union with the divine is going to be a blissful experience. So I thoroughly enjoyed having this conversation with Grisha. I highly recommend all of you watch it throughout and let me know in the comments what was your biggest takeaway from this entire conversation. Grisha ji, thank you so much for making time to come for this podcast because, even before we started the podcast, the kind of conversations that we had, I only wish we could have recorded them because it was just so profound. And I'll tell you this little story as to exactly, I think it was almost like 12 months or 11 months back, I stumbled upon a reel on Instagram where two people were talking about how psychedelics and spirituality can coexist or how it works. I was kind of intrigued by the reel and I was like, there is this person who talks about how psychedelic shows you the way and shows you the door, but how true sadhana is the only one. And you also gave an amazing example of casual sex and also having an intimate love with a partner.
Yeah.
I was mind blown with that podcast you've done with Adarsh, I guess.
Yes.
And I went and I saw the entire podcast, and in my head, at that time, I did not have a podcast. I did not even have an intention of starting one. But then I told myself, if ever I start a podcast, I will definitely invite Grisha for that. Just for the honesty of where you were coming from. It was not coming from a superficial space. It was coming from a much more deeper space of being in that essence of truth. And that truly moved. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm sure this podcast is going to help a lot of people understand themselves better, understand the truth a little better. And it's going to help me also understand a little bit about why I'm put here. Because most of the questions I've prepared for this podcast are my own questions. And me and my teammate Anusha, we sit down. When we sit down for questions, we choose to come up with questions that kind of open up something inside of you, because I believe that is something that is missing. And when we spoke, the first thing that you said was, let it just be flowy. Let it just be about the truth and simple. Let it not be to spice something up and create controversies. I want to start off with that. What is your take on that?
First of all, I'm really happy to be here, and any space that allows this interaction to happen, because I really feel that being a young woman myself, I feel that a lot of people resonate with someone who is in that space, in that, age of life, or on that journey oneself, has not really reached anywhere, but just constantly working towards it. So I'm very, very happy to be at this place. And I am actually more grateful that you have, invited this and you're making this happen, because I love such interactions where we can be simple and we can speak about the truth as per our understanding as much as possible. Going back to your question of controversy, I can always say I feel, I know, or I believe, but I think there is no such thing. There's always a subconscious at play in the background, and then comes your ego that attaches I to it. So this no belief, all of that is coming from your subconscious mind, right? And from the conscious mind, the ahankara comes along and say, I know, I believe, I feel. So, while we use this simple term to just convey our own feelings about something, but none of these are ours in the first place. That being said, I'm going to talk about the controversy bit a little bit. I feel that in this space, as I continue to read different scriptures about different gurus and meet them, essentially sit with them, when I meet people who are part of this world, I feel that they somehow have created a different web of spirituality and this path. And I always felt a sense of complication in the the knowledge that came to me from the people who are a part of the sansar as such, including myself. But the moment I met the sant and mahant who have nothing to do with the sansar, I felt, is spirituality this simple? Is it this pure? Is just sitting next to them, they are not even talking. They're just being there with you. And the most profound experience that I had of simplicity, purity, and truth was when I was in Gangotri, and Gurudev took us to different saints there who live there, including female saints there who are renunciates. And I sat next to a very beautiful, wonderful, soulful sadhu who apparently was managing the whole ashram. When we reached there, he ran towards us. He was so happy that people have come. And whatever he had in the kitchen, so someone gave him milk and a couple of apples, he brought everything. And he said, come, sit next to me. He laid out some carpet for us, right? Gave us the hot milk prepared with his own hands. Gave us the fruits he had. And he himself sat down on the floor. Now tell me, can you understand the difference between when some person becomes a little popular, even in the spirituality world, they want to be treated, differently. Yeah. What they want to be treated as someone who is the knower, someone who has the knowledge. And meeting them for the first time, my perspective shifted. Literally just looking at them, I could reflect the amount of ahankar I was holding. Because of the number of followers, because of the certain people liking you, disliking you, or looking up to you, I looked at myself and I said, oh my God, Grisha, where have you reached? Look at yourself. Have you ever done this to someone? Have you ever been like this? Then no, you haven't even started on this journey. So talking about controversies, like I always feel in this world of social media, which in a way is helping us a lot, but there also comes the desire to go viral, to create controversy, because, and it's not their fault, another perspective, the psychology of the world works like that. They want spice. Even when it comes to something as simple as spirituality or understanding God and feeling God, people try to complicate that. They try to create a wow factor around God to make you believe in God. Or there are fear-mongering reels, right? Or there are do this and don't do that. If you do this, something will happen. If you don't do this, something will happen. Sitting next to them, I felt God is pure love.
Wow.
Pure love and nothing more than that. Can you be this knowledgeable And can you be this grounded?
Wow.
That made me reflect at how much of ahankari I myself have always been, and I still am as I speak.
Wow. So basically, when you sit next to a guru, right, like somebody who is evolved than what we are at this point of time, why do we start feeling that sense of bliss and ease when we sit next to them, or go to a place where they've meditated for like, because I still remember going to Virupaksha cave, which is Ramana Maharishi, where
Yes,
he
yes.
meditated. And I still remember just sitting in the silence, in the dark, and crying for 10-15 minutes. I don't know why. But in the heart, it felt so calm, so peaceful, and so much at ease. Why does this happen?
Okay, I always go back to Ganga for an example, like, because I have learned so much from Ganga, right? Even the researchers recently said that Ganga is the purest water.
Yeah.
Like it is the only river that has the self-cleaning mechanism. And so whenever you go towards Ganga, you always take some of the Ganga water and bring it back home. And any auspicious event that is happening, or even on the daily basis, a lot of us during our puja sprinkle the Ganga water, right? And you believe that it is going to purify, right? That's nothing but just the pranic urja that water carries, right? So sadhana, any amount of sadhana, any person, who has transcended these samskaras, these bijas, and all of these chains that we as human are bound to or are constantly in fluctuation of, those who transcend that, their pranic urja becomes very, very strong. So much that it is no longer just contained in their body. It begins to spread out. It is said that a yogis whose Mooladhara chakra is active, right? Within the 3 kilometers, there's going to be absolute peace. Absolute peace. That's how the connection of their own pranic urja is with the Mahaprana, the universal urja. And they not only sit there, like how Ganga water sprinkled somewhere creates the purity in that area. It is believed that the whole area gets purified as soon as the Ganga water is being sprinkled. Likewise, because the pranic urja of the Ganga water is very high. A lot of sadhus have done sadhana, and water is one of such elements that captures most amount of pranic urja.
Okay.
Right? So lot of sadhana happens next to Ganga. That's one reason. Likewise, within us, all the elements purify. So a sadhu who has become at that level, someone who has transcended the fluctuation, becomes so pure, so full of that pranic urja that it spreads out everywhere. So even if you come in contact with the pranic urja, the sadhu must be sitting far away from there, but his urja can be felt from a certain distance. You begin to feel the peace, you begin to feel the calm. So they are vibrating at that level. It is said in yoga multiple times, in spirituality multiple times, and even now science says that everything is energy.
Yes.
You're always vibrating.
Yes.
That's what. So now they are vibrating at such a high frequency that the place that they sit gets highly charged. It's also said about Shiva that why in the house of Shiva there is a Nandi, right? And then there is a rat also, right? And then there are snake also. So all sorts of animal live in harmony and peace. There is a Nandi. Nandi belongs to Shiva. To Shakti, there is also a lion usually, right? A tiger or a lion is represented as the vehicle of Shakti. And they live in harmony in the humble abode of Shiva.
It's because of their energy.
Yes.
Okay.
So it is said that like if you are into sadhana, trust me, you come in contact with their energy and you'll start crying immediately. Your heart will start melting. And even if you're not in sadhana, if you are in just the simple power of surrender, openness, you will instantly absorb that energy.
Right. Grisha, it's so beautiful you brought this term surrender, because when we speak about manifestation, when we speak about letting go, there's a lot of context that we give about surrendering, right? Surrendering is not giving up. Surrendering is you giving up your attachment to the outcome of what you want to manifest. So now when it comes to surrendering from a spiritual perspective, what does surrendering truly mean?
Surrendering when it comes to spiritual perspective is always trusting the fact that even the hardships are a fruit of God, are a gift of God. So when something good happens to us, we say we are very grateful, this is God's gift. Have you ever seen normal human beings talk about that the pain that I got is a God gift? The hardship that I got is a God gift. So when you say samarpan or surrender, it just simply means that anything that is happening to you internally and externally is nothing but the plan of God, not your plan. So the moment you start thinking about certain events in your life are your plan, that's where the surrender goes away. So surrender is very, and you'll see even if people like us, papi like us, who say we are in surrender, we are not. We want to control everything in life as much as the only difference is a sadhak is trying to surrender. Others are not even aware about it, other human beings, or sadhak is trying to surrender. And an enlightened being is in complete surrender.
So where is this need to surrender? Where is this need to control coming for all of us?
Fear.
Okay.
Always fear.
Okay.
The background of everything is fear. Think about your life. Any event where you felt disheartened, where you felt, failure, where you felt depressive, where you felt anxious, everything has something to do with fear. Fear of dying, fear of losing control, fear of failure, fear of this, fear of that. Fear comes in human evolution as a part of our instincts. It is a part of human instinct. And that is why the another thing is mind does not actually differentiate between reality and imagination. We know that fact.
Yes.
That's why even if there is no fear, our mind creates it in this, in the pattern, the cyclical pattern of the thoughts, and therefore make you believe there is a fear, and therefore act you like you want to be in control. And when you don't get the control, you get angry, you get anxious. And that's when you begin to either fall into the well of depression or anxiety. That's what happens.
Right.
It's all a pattern.
Right. While the awareness of the world is also growing, the chaos in the world is also growing. Why do you think? What is actually happening with our world?
This is nature, Gayatri ji.
Okay.
You look at the nature. I always give this example, and this takes me back to one of the seeker who came to our sadhana program, and this when the war situation was really bad in Israel, and she came to us very devastated. She said, God feels like God has given me another life, because 3 times she was prevented from being bombed in the house that she was living in. Apparently then she had to leave the country. So she came to India, for some solace. And so she and we were having this conversation, and she said, I've lost faith in humanity after seeing this. I don't know if I'll ever bring a human in this world. And I just told her to close her eyes and imagine, isn't death happening in nature? Isn't one animal killing the another animal in nature? I gave her an example of one time how I was watching Discovery and I saw hyenas eating, right? So a deer was giving birth, and while she was giving birth, hyenas were eating that child that was coming out of the vagina. So there is chaos also. I won't say chaos, but that's just nature, right? Something that humans don't pay attention to is this, right? They always, when you look at nature, you see waterfall, you see trees.
Yeah.
Do you see the side of nature where there's carcass lying, where one animal eating another, one tiger killing the cubs of another tigress to get hold of that, tigress for himself, right? So there are all sorts of things happening in nature. And that's what someone who has an open perspective tries to see. So chaos is happening. And I trust that, Gayatri ji, the more chaos happens, the more desire to seek balance will also generate.
Yes.
That's how nature works. That's how it will always work. Trust me, we think the world is dooming. No. I see now is the time when you'll see the flow of spirituality coming into the people. One has to suffer to look for peace.
Yeah.
One has to see the pain to understand what happiness and true solace is.
Right.
That's why you see so many Westerners now moving coming here to seek solace. You know, there was a point where we wanted to run there, right? We still are for different reasons, and which is good. I love this whole globalization thing happening, because then there are more people coming here. The more your culture goes there, the more they get inspired by that culture and also come here. There's a perspective there too. Right? So trust me, chaos is happening, but at the same time, you will see the desire for balance, peace will also generate. That's just nature.
Right. I mean, this is a question that I think I've been asking myself for a really, really long time. And I think I'm getting slightly closer to the truth. And every time I ask this question to somebody who's been on the same path, it just opens up something else for me. What is the purpose of life?
I love this question because I like to reframe it every time somebody asks me. So you said purpose in life. There are two aspects to it, right? So life is given to a moth as well, right? 48 hours, whatever number of hours. You ask a moth, what is the purpose of your life? Say, I want to die for this light.
Okay.
A moth will always roam around the light a whole night, right? And then the next morning, it will be dead on the floor. What's the purpose of life? To chase that. Of life is to chase that light.
Correct.
You ask the same question from a lion. I want to be the king. Certain area should be mine. All the females in this area should be mine. I want to kill, eat, reproduce, and be the boss. Is there any other purpose a lion will tell you? No. But a lion has a life.
Right.
Now you give this life to someone, a human being who is struggling to survive and is very poor, right? Can't earn bread properly for the family. You ask that person, okay, now that you're human, you've given this life, what is your purpose? I would say, I really want to earn bread for my family. Now you move on to another human being who has bread, who has shelter. They would say, if they are more rooted towards the materialistic growth, they would say, I want a big house, I want this and that, right? And then you ask someone who has everything but is still not happy, and that person has realized, I'm not happy. You ask that person, what is the purpose of life? They say, now I want to quit everything.
Yes.
Now I have it. Now that I have it, and I know that none of this gives me happiness, I want to quit it and I want to seek the true happiness.
Right.
So understand, I would reframe this question, what is the purpose of consciousness that is being gifted to human beings? Because an animal will never grow from that.
Okay.
A moth will never grow from that. But a human is the only species that has been given this consciousness. And the only purpose I feel is to keep evolving this consciousness, to reach the highest of this consciousness and realizing the truth of life. Right? Now, in that journey, you will definitely have to go through the Purusharths, we say, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. You have to hold on to these pillars, right? You also have to do your duties. You have to go through the ashrams that are designed for humans. All of that you have to go through and still seek to evolve. Then how do I reach the higher consciousness? That is the goal of human being. Once your food needs are taken care of, okay, how do I evolve more? Once this is taken care of, this ashram is taken care of, how do I evolve more? Now, most of the humans get stuck till this point where we think of reproducing, gaining material happiness, temporary happiness, gaining fame or popularity or, whatever. And very few people are trying to evolve. That's why I always feel there might be millions and trillions of humans taking birth, but only few reaching that funnel. And that's why probably God is continuously giving more births, because God wants maximum of us to really realize the true purpose of consciousness is to reach as high as possible and understand the reality of God.
So the longing that we all have is the longing to go back to the source. And we misunderstand that and run behind the material things to only be disappointed that these material things will never give me what that is. And the only reason we even know what that feels like to be in the source is because we've been there. Okay. Why are we stuck in this illusion of Maya?
This is how it is. That's the play. You know what is Maya? It's a play of God. You know, the God is sitting back and relaxing and enjoying all of these humans go through this, you know. But at the same time, God has also opened up so many windows for humans to realize that this is Maya, this is Maya. And those who realize come to the path of sadhana.
Okay.
They come to the path of sadhana. You know, let's say I would say this is your plan. Okay, let's say this is your plan. Okay, but this is God's plan. At every curve, the God's plan is coincide.
You have an opportunity. Yeah.
You have. What are these curves? Hardships, pain, realization, disheartenment, sorrows, you know, all of those feeling of discomforts, extreme discomfort. That's the point where the God's plan is coincide.
Okay.
And also the door is open.
Okay.
What do? We say, no, we won't. We are so afraid. We
Go
take
back.
this.
Yeah.
And then again, we go back there. God says, oh, there's an opportunity. We go back here. There's an opportunity. We go. So you keep doing this, but the ones who understand that, oh no, this is where I evolve. This is the time. The funny part is you don't realize this is the time.
Yeah.
You just trust the God. Now that's where comes the surrender.
Right.
You said, no, there might be God has something for me. I'm getting this intuition.
Yes.
I'm getting this intuition you gets here.
Okay.
Right? Where his plan is coinciding with you. And that's where you don't then run away. You come on this path.
Okay.
And then you follow the God's plan. And that's what we call purpose of your birth.
Okay.
That's what we call purpose of your birth. This is the point where you will find why you were born, what was your role, and then you start following that purpose. That's when popularity, fame, growth, manifestations, all of that comes true.
Yeah.
At the same time, God also plays with you a little bit of Maya, gives you ahankar.
Okay.
That's going to be there.
Right.
So God gives you ahankar. Okay, now that you've come to this path, very good. But I'm not going to make it easy.
Right.
So ahankar is the door that takes you back.
Right. So the ultimate purpose for all of us is to reach nirvana, right? To understand that who we are and the cosmos is one and the same. My question is, when the soul incarnated here, what was the need for it to forget what lessons it wanted to learn?
So I'll tell you, that's what Maya does, right? Maya's, there is this Adhyaya 31 in Bhagavad Gita that talks about where a child's journey in the womb, right? And very beautifully, Shri Krishna talks about how that child is stuck, between the intestines of the mother and feeling the pain and thinking of God and remembering Him and telling Him, thinking of all the past births and realizing that as soon as I get out of, please take me out, I'm in so much pain. As soon as I get out of it, God, I will look forward to walking this path again where, I unite with you and I will do my karma and everything. But as soon as the child comes out of that discomfort into the comfort of the mother's arm and this world, the Maya strikes him or her and then everything is forgotten. That's exactly what happens in our life. In the moment when we are going through a lot of pain, we remember God and say, no, I'm trying to understand you. Please help me. I'm stuck. Okay, God comes and helps you. But after some time, you forget that and you're back to zero again, right? That's exactly that's the play of Maya, right? It just prevents you from understanding the reality. So Maya is delusion. In Bhagavad Gita, there's also an example of inverted tree. As one of the very, very finest example. So in the God's worlds, in humans' world, what we see is everything is inverted, right? So for us, tree is the trunk down, roots down, and the branches and the crown up. In the divine's world, in the subtle world, transcendental world, it's reverse. The roots are upward, and the trunk is facing downward, and the hanging fruits that are there are the little trees are like different human beings' desires and all that, and the fruits are the fruits that we always seek. Right? So that's an example. So that they have used that example to show the Maya, like everything, Maya is illusion. So what we think is the truth is not the truth. That's what it means. And the one who is in a strong swadhyay, like always constantly contemplating on one's thoughts, one's reactions, one's actions, one's, fluctuations that are coming to the mind, they realize that no, this is not me. This is not me. This is the situation trying to play with me. This is my samskaras trying to play with me. So an aware human being, or at least someone who's on the path of awareness and follows the practice of Swadhyaya or Swadhyan, they start to see the situations like that.
Okay.
They start to see everything differently. So they start to get a glimpse of what we call the real world.
Right. So when you started reading the Gita, what were the biggest lessons from there that truly transformed the way you looked at life?
So I think one of the shloka that I read, that where it was very beautifully said that कि प्रभु की दो मुख्य शक्तियाँ होती हैं. One is para and apara shakti. So we say that no, the whole divine transcendental world is the world of God. But this says even the bhautik world is the world of God and enjoyed by the God himself. That's why I say कि मैं बाहर भी हूँ और अंदर भी हूँ. Right? That's what Krishna says. So and I've had this conversation with my guru where I said, apara and para. That means even the bhautik vastu or the bhautik or the material enjoyments that we believe that we are enjoying are also technically enjoyed by the God. So these are the two Shaktis of God. The only Param Mukhya Shaktis of God are Para and Apara. So there is a transcendental world and there is this material world. And both are technically being enjoyed. Whereas if you see in the world of spirituality, we say, oh, these are the human desires experiencing, right? And the spiritual desires are technically the desires of God, but that's not true.
Okay.
Both of them are the desires of God.
Okay.
Right? So one has to just start realizing, shift from this desire of the God to that desire of the God.
Okay.
We say sansar is enjoyed by humans being. I'm sorry, but created by who?
Yeah.
So who do you think is the controller? Who do you think is the enjoyer?
Right.
We are not. So
Right.
that was one of the things that gave me like a wonderful perspective. And a point that really stayed with me in one of the shlokas is that where Krishna is trying to tell Arjuna that, Arjun, kill them. Kill them because they're already being killed by me. So the papi, right? All of these people where Arjun had conflict of killing them because he thinks that I'm not doing a good thing. He said, what do you think you are killing? You're just killing the bodies. Their consciousness is already killed by me. So that made me reflect that we may live as human being for 70, 80 years, but in the eyes of divine and God, if your consciousness is that low, you're already dead. You've cut off all the possible cords with the universe in all forms, and that's why we say now you're just a bhogi, right? You're just a bhogi because you have already been killed. And that made me reflect that yes, you may live for 30 years, no problem, right? But in those 30 years, if your consciousness is going the right way, if you are walking the path of consciousness, then you are living, even if you physically die, you're living in the eyes of God. Right? You are living in the eyes of consciousness, and that's what we call Bhava Pratyayo Videhe Prakriti Layana. I was speaking to you about it, that how the soul of these, Sutra says, the soul of these people whose consciousness has reached certain level, they gets merged with the Prakriti and they come back again when the time is right. Right? Adi Shankaracharya left his body at the age of 32 doing so much for the humanity. Do you think he was an incarnation of Shiva himself, we say? Do you think he ever died? He never died.
Why do some people just choose to live in ignorance?
They don't choose to live in ignorance. It's again Maya. You need to understand, some people, Maya is happening to all.
Okay.
Ignorance, Gayatri ji, is happening to all.
Okay.
Some people choose awareness. So the choice is not of ignorance. The choice is of awareness.
Okay.
Awareness is a choice.
Okay.
Ignorance is a play of Maya. That is happening to all of us. Even those who choose awareness, they are bound to fall in the pits of ignorance. Now that they have the ladder of awareness, they just know how to climb back up. That's the only difference.
So in this incarnation, the mind was given to be like an agent of the soul, right?
Mhm.
But now, what has happened in between that we've started to believe that we are the mind? Though it was supposed to be a tool for us, now we've started to believe we are that, we are our thoughts. What confusion happened in between?
There's no confusion. It's just that that's just how nature works. So there was a beautiful story that I was reading where, a tiger's cub gets lost in a jungle and is joined by the clan of deers. Okay? Raised like deers. Now, deer is a vegetarian, right? And a cub and a tiger is a wild animal, right? But because this cub is being raised with deer, live like them, breathe like them, be in their company, right? He begins to run, right? When someone is coming for, or some other wild animal is coming for hunting, forgetting that I myself, I am a wild animal, right? So that's what happens. So now one day what happens is this cub, one day, once he grows up a little bit, he sees the other, tigers running and hunting. Now he sees the reality is different. The deers, my brothers and sister, those are apparently, I think, are my brother and sister. They are running and one of me is chasing.
Yeah.
So who am I?
Yeah.
That's when the question comes.
Wow.
That's when people start to think. I have so far been running in this race without knowing who I am. That's when the first question in spirituality, when it comes, that question has to be, who am I?
When did you ask that question to yourself?
To me, I always say this, when Corona started,
Okay.
we were shut indoors.
Okay.
Now, when such this, for me, Corona was an opportunity, I would say, because for the first time I had complete cut off with the world, right? You did have obviously Instagram, social media, but there was no human interaction. You could not continue what you were doing. So what you thought you were, that your job made you feel, your friends made you feel, your colleagues made you feel, your daily life made you feel, now it's no longer happening and you don't know when will it happen again. So I felt a sense of, not a sense, but a great sense of unhappiness. Because then I started to feel, if all of this is taken away from me, I am going to be very unhappy. So then what is happiness? I thought I have built this so many years studying and struggling and building, career, we say. I have built everything with my own two hands and my own mastermind, so to speak, right? But now everything is falling apart. If this is taken away from me, I don't even know who this person is. Why am I born? What else I will do in life? And this made me feel a lot of sorrow in my heart. At first, I was lost. There were times when I had shut myself in the room and I was crying. So I understand people were crying out of the fear of death. I didn't have the fear of death. I had some other fear. The fear of who I am. If this is taken away from me, take away my life.
Okay.
But if you take all of this, which I believed to be true about myself, if this is taken away from me, that was the first time I asked myself, who am I? And that's when I actually started practicing yoga as well.
Wow.
Just to go inward and understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, I was very unhealthy. I also was mentally falling apart. So I thought, if I can't do anything, maybe let me just start doing yoga. Maybe it'll help. And us samay pe you would see yoga popularized bhi hona shuru hua tha, at that point in time. So I said, okay, this might help me. And that's where technically the journey also started.
How has your perspective about success and ambition changed from then to now?
So, honestly speaking, it's when I didn't chase the success and ambition, I actually got the true success and ambition. So all that while, as I said, I was running with the clan of deers, or I would say I was a deer running with a, like a herd of tigers and cubs. I didn't know that I am not cut out for this. I was made to believe so. So when you are made to believe something, you also are not, even though I was giving my best, even though I got what I wanted in my career as well, but that was not the ultimate truth and purpose of my life, I realized, right? It did give me a little bit of financial security, did help me survive, did, take care of the material things that you have, not too much, but little bit. But did it give me happiness and contentment? It didn't. After I realized, in that moment I was I'm the most successful person. But the moment that pause happened and I reflected, so to me, ambition and success, it changes with the change when the consciousness changes for you. Trust me, you ask a sadhu what is the definition of success and ambition, they'll speak entirely different thing. So as I say, you ask this question, what is the purpose of life? Think about who you are asking.
Right.
They will have different answers.
Depending on what level of consciousness they
That's
are.
why I didn't give you this answer of you attain nirvana, go back to source. You go and talk about this to a rickshawala who is trying to survive. He said, what nirvana? What are you talking about? Right?
Exactly.
Human needs to look for answers like this,
Right.
I feel.
Right.
There's no one answer.
One answer, yes. So what I want to also understand is, what is the biggest myth about yoga that people believe right now?
I think the biggest myth is yoga makes you feel very good. And this is the myth about meditation also. Meditation is not something that you would say it's a feel-good thing, no. Yoga, I'll tell you what yoga is, right? Imagine you have a glass of water in which there is lots of dirt and sand sitting right now, right? So what is happening is at the moment your mind is like, so therefore no clarity, right? Therefore physical ailments, mental ailments, emotional, imbalances and distraction and not finding the purpose, all sorts of miserable things. The human world at least calls that is happening to you because this is what is happening. So yoga is when you start to do yoga, obviously some of that settle down. Some of that settle down. Some of that settle down. Now, you'll see the clear water, but my dear friends, you will also see the dirt. The dirt has settled down. Now, one little stir happens, it comes back up.
Correct.
So yoga is not walking a path of, oh, I feel blissful, oh, I am so happy all the time, oh, I am never miserable. No. You will be miserable. The fact that you will no longer be impacted by it. Now, that's the real yoga. You will see your ahankar in front of you, which you were, when in ignorance, you could not see. You will see all sorts of ill thoughts you carry. That's what yoga. So yoga, if you're doing it right, it first makes you feel uncomfortable.
Okay.
Makes you see all sorts of some samskaras and dirts that are coming from your subconscious mind, your mad, your matsarya, your lobh, moh, everything. All the enemies stand in front of you. The thing is, now, earlier the enemies were standing next to you. Now they stand in front of you. So yoga and meditation both are actually meant to make you see that first. If you don't see the enemy, how will you shoot an arrow towards them?
Wow.
That's the power of yoga.
Okay.
वो आपको आपके अंदर का गंध दिखा के इतना break करेगा, it is going to disintegrate you first. And then you will realize, oh my God, all of this I was carrying inside me. And that's when the tivra samveg, the desire to rise above these enemies come. They don't come on the first day on the mat. They don't also come after many years on the mat, because yoga is not to be just done on the mat.
Wow.
Another myth. So no,
Okay.
It's not just 1 hour of practice you do on the mat. It's a consciousness is always at work. Your yoga is always at work 24/7.
So now this brings me to the next question. So every guru that is out there, the real ones, who've truly walked the path and who are helping us walk the path, everybody has a different way of understanding or reaching the truth, right? So for Ramana Maharishi, it was about self-inquiry.
Yes.
With Buddha, it was more about observe the sensations in your body and transcend your mind. So even Gita talks about this, right? It talks about Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. Is everything a path to going to the truth, or what is the difference between all these three?
Yeah. So I'll tell you one thing. There is a Shiva temple, there's Vishnu temple, there's Devi temple, there's all sorts of temple. You see the word temple is there.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter which deity you go to worship, you go to temple. Every temple is called mandir.
Right.
Have you ever seen any temple being called a club or something else? No, every temple is a temple. And it's a very simple, example that tells you that doesn't matter which deity you choose, doesn't matter which path you choose. You choose Kriya Yoga, you choose Karma Yoga, you choose Raj Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Hatha Yoga. All sorts of paths lead you to one door. But at the same time, the beauty of all these paths is at some point in time, these paths also coincides.
Okay.
A Hatha Yogi will transcend to Jnana and Raj Yoga eventually. Okay. So they may start somewhere, but they will reach the higher schools or the paths eventually. And very easily they will, आपको पता भी नहीं चलेगा. Very easily you will be drifted there.
Okay.
So that's why so many people carry the thought of, I don't do bhakti, but I do yoga. If you do yoga, trust me, you will be drifted towards bhakti at some point in time, because faith is the foundation of this path.
Okay.
So where do you think yoga is taking you? When you think you are uniting with the higher source, you must have the faith that there is a higher source.
Correct.
That higher source can have a form, cannot have a form. That doesn't matter. But that has to, Ishwar Pranidhanatva has to be there.
Right.
So bhakti will eventually find you. So that's what, higher paths will find you. There's no higher, lower path. Even if you start from bhakti, some other path, Gyan will find you. So wherever you start, the next door will find you.
Organically will be.
You will be.
Okay.
If you are walking it the right way and if you are in surrender, you are constantly connected to these intuitions you are getting, either with the help of your physical guru or with the help of the, Prakritik gurus, we say, those who are guiding you.
So what role does pranayama play in all of this?
Pranayama has a very, very huge role in this, not in this, in your entire path, right? Because when you see the Ashtanga path of yoga, it starts from Yam, Niyam, Asana, Pranayama, right? So all of these paths are working on the mind. And pranayama is one of the greatest tool to cessate the fluctuations of the mind.
Okay.
Because pranayama use something. So your breath is gross and subtle, both. The breath can be felt here in the external, and when you inhale with awareness can also be felt inside. So breath is a bridge between that external and internal world that you have. And pranayama or pranic vidya, right, uses that breath as a tool to, so there is, I told you, there's a Mahaprana, universal prana, and then there's internal prana, right? So breath is also standing in between, trying to connect you with both the worlds, right? So when you start doing pranayama, all the mind thoughts and fluctuations are happening because of the constant movement of the pran vayus in the body. There are 5 types of vayus.
Okay.
So they move, and accordingly your mind moves, and vice versa. When your mind moves, they actually manipulate those vayus, right? That's why I would say you will see someone who is going through a lot of chronic disease, if they begin to do a lot of meditation and mind change work, right? You can believe you are diseased and you are dying, you are dying, you are dying. You can believe that you are diseased, but you will live, you will live, you will live. So that's just, you have just played with your prana. Because you played with your thoughts, you started manipulating the prana. So the pranas that were dying because of the disease in the body, now they start to expand.
Okay.
So pranayama is the conscious manipulation, not through just the thoughts. But through the breath, you work on the thoughts, calm these thoughts down, cultivate good ones, change the movement of the vayus, and therefore reach the higher path. So it's transcending the mind with the help of. So yoga में ना सब कुछ reverse कर
Yeah,
देते हैं,
yeah.
वो सीधा सीधा रास्ता नहीं, घुमा देते हैं,
Yeah.
right? So yoga is not a natural path, by the way. It should try to manipulate with these things, especially hatha yoga.
Okay.
It's the entire path of changing and manipulating things
Okay.
within your system.
Okay.
So that's what pranayam does to you. Very, very essential.
So what does shallow breathing do to our body?
So when it comes to, so A is like deep breathing, right? So when you do deep breathing, and now you can deep breathe for a moment, it will make you feel good, right? But a deep breathing is not pranayam. Pranayam is very, very different. Pranayam is also channelizing your mind towards that certain part. So pranayam happens when the concentration and ekagrata is also happening at the same time, right? You can keep doing this, but if you're not mentally channelizing the breath in certain areas of the body or concentrating in certain areas of the body, then pranayam is not happening. Then you're just deep breathing, by the way. Yeah, there's a difference between, and scriptures speak about it. You pick any scripture, any good profound scripture, they speak about there is a difference between breathing and doing pranayam. Pranayam is mentally at the same time concentrating on certain areas, channelizing your breath there, also being able to identify the vibrations and the movement of certain vayu within that area, mentally reverse it. Now that's not a job of breath. You can't do that.
Yeah.
You'll be like, okay, I'm breathing, I'll hold my breath, good. And then release. Good. What happened? I ask you what happened. Which vayu got manipulated? Which vayu got reversed? What happened within that area? What sensation did you feel in that specific inner part of the body? You will have no answer. You'll just feel, I breathed from here. I felt a little bit of movement here and breath came out. No. So pranayam is along with the breath when you use the power of mind to manipulate those vayus, reverse them. That's why they say pranayam cannot happen without the bandhas, the locks, the energy locks that we apply, without the mudras to reverse the flow of the outgoing prana inward.
Okay.
And so this is where most of the prana is going down for animals. It's always here. That's why they say the lower chakras are active for animals. Humans, what they do is, and this is also called the source of the storehouse of the prana. It's this. This is the Muladhara, is where the source or the storehouse of the prana is. Now what humans do is, pranayam is essentially a technique of reversing, awakening that storehouse, opening the door to it, and reversing the flow upward.
Okay.
To raise in the higher chakras, right? The chakra that we have, the 7 chakras. So reversing the flow of prana and manipulating them mentally along with the help of the breath as a tool. So breath is just a tool for pranayam, by the way.
Okay.
Just a tool.
Okay, it's so misunderstood that
Yes.
pranayam is just breathing exercise.
Yeah. And trust me, you can talk about it by reading books, but someone who has actually felt the play of prana vayus in the body can only teach you, by the way. Actually, most of the people who think they are either practicing or teaching pranayam, they are not, I believe so. Because when I started to understand the real sides of the pranayam, I actually got a reality check of what have I been doing from last 2 years. You know, okay, it made me feel good. Correct. Deep breathing makes everyone feel good. But what else is happening in my system? Then I obviously got help from a teacher, and, I learned the right techniques. And then when I started practicing, then, oh my God, that 1 year I understood what this is. And that, I'm sorry, Gayatri ji, even how much ever hard I try, cannot be explained in words. Because that's something that has to be experienced.
Yeah.
So just breathing is not pranayam.
Yeah. So when you speak about certain things can only be experienced, it can't be explained, it reminds me of when I was going through a very difficult situation in 2021. It was major anxiety attacks. I went through a lot of pain, and I don't know what happened one day. Morning, I was in an auto going to my office. I'm just sitting in the auto. I'm just feeling so blissful. Till date, when I think about that moment, right? I've read so many books. I've listened to so many lectures. Everybody talks about a state of bliss. I've really not understood what it was. I knew they're talking about something, but I've not had a first-hand experience of it. But that 24 hours, it stayed only for one day. I slept and I woke up. I did not feel that again. I just felt so connected yet so disconnected. I was just feeling at ease and peace and a state of tranquility on the inside. Till date, a part of me is still longing for that. A part of me is longing for that. It says, okay, God has shown you something, what could possibly be there for the rest of your life. You've just gotten a sneak peek into that. I think the journey is to get to that point, because I think even my purpose over time has evolved. And at this point of time, if somebody comes and asks me what my purpose is, I would only say my purpose is to get to a point where when nothing changes on the inside, irrespective of what is happening on the outside. Because it is not an intellectual understanding of everything is happening for the highest good, but rather an experiential knowing everything is perfect. I think that is the journey that I am going towards. And I think that sneak peek of how it feels to be in a state of bliss, that kind of changed. I've been trying to explain that to so many people, but I think I've failed explaining that. And I think we all have access to that.
You do. Everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone. I'm so happy that you shared this experience with me and this audience. And because it is really, it's a very, very, very good question and topic to talk about in a way. Okay. So yes, you are right about point number one, that this bliss can be experienced by anyone and everyone. And as I speak, and those who are listening, at some point in time, you would have felt that you're happy for no reason. 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 6 hours, 10 hours, 24 hours tops, right? I'll tell you one more thing, okay? When you go to sleep, there are stages of sleep, right? There comes a sleep which we call dreamless sleep, right? It lasts for a couple of hours, right? And when you get those couple of hours of sleep, when you wake up, you feel very good, right? You do. You feel like, I've had a very good sleep. I've had a wonderful sleep. In those 2 hours, you have no idea of either time or space. Correct? You're lost.
Yes.
You're lost. So imagine you feeling such blissfulness and good after being lost, right? Actually, what happens is, scientifically, your mind is not in the present or in the past, or in the future in that point in time. The mind is just in the state of existence, right? That's what it is. The only thing is, you are not aware of that when you're sleeping.
Okay.
You're not aware of that when you're sleeping. The same exact thing happens when you meditate. You're consciously trying to get that state where, again, the mind is not in the past or in the future, but in complete presence along with the awareness. Therefore, in 1 hour of meditation, even if you get 5 minutes of that nothing, the spaciousness we call it, the emptiness we call it, the stillness we call it, that 5 minutes feel like, wow. And within the moment you realize, I am feeling something is gone.
Gone. Exactly.
For normal human beings, so many times this happens. So scientific explanation to this is, in that moment, your mind is not worried either of the future or of the past. It just simply realizes that I'm present. So in the moment of unsaid bliss, which has no explanation, it is the moment of you experiencing the conscious flow of awareness in the present. That's what yoga does to you. That's what meditation does to you. So that yoga and meditation is a conscious effort to expand this window as much as possible. That's how Buddha got enlightened.
Yeah.
So what is enlightened? Enlightenment is always in
Being
this
in that
window.
space.
Yeah. And not fluctuating. So yoga chitta vritti nirodha. चित्त की वृत्ति क्या है? ये जो पास्ट और फ्यूचर के बीच में हम फ्लक्चुएट करते रहते हैं, यही तो वृत्ति है. तो योग क्या करता है? उस वृत्ति का निरोध कर देता है, सेसेट. ends. So you are more in the. So meditation and yoga is essentially an effort to expand that window consciously.
Right.
That's what it is.
Right. So, especially when, for example, somebody like Buddha, somebody who's attained enlightenment, they know when to use their mind and it is at their disposal.
Yes.
But now the mind is using us and we
Yes.
are at mind's disposal.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
crazy how
Yes.
we look
you
at
think,
it.
oh, I'm thinking from my mind.
Yeah, yeah.
And also, I'm telling you, once you start, not just say you can, and you cannot intellectually understand any of this. I will say again and again, I have read Yoga Sutras from the time I started doing yoga. I still read it again and again. And every time, the first 2.5 years, I understand nothing. I was like, what are they saying? Nidra is a vritti. How is Nidra sweetney? Nidra makes us feel good. Like imagine such stupid things come from within you because your consciousness is not there.
Yeah.
Now I can say that I have started to understand bits and pieces of it after going through the practical understanding and swadhyay.
Right.
Like, so that's very different. You can go back to the same scripture again and again after 1 year of your sadhana, and if the understanding has deepened, that means good, your sadhana is going right. If your understanding of certain scripture is still sitting there even after coming back of 1 year and 2 years, that means you're still working in progress, but consciousness has not shifted. And that's what we say, the download of knowledge all the saints get is nothing but their access to this ever prevailing knowledge gets more and more and more with time. So
Okay.
even if there is one shabd, the earth changes for them again and again and again, and the gyan changes for them again
Because
and
of the
again and
consciousness expanding.
again. Yes, in the conscious realm there is shabd, earth, gyan. So it keeps evolving for them. So first they are working with the shabd.
Okay.
As you grow in the consciousness, you're working with the earth,
Yeah.
and then you're only working with the gyan. Always give this example to my students. Can I say that?
Yes, please.
I say, Gayatri ji, you're stupid. So when I say stupid, suddenly your ego will get hurt because you heard the word stupid, and you know the sound of this word stupid is not good. There
Right.
is a belief in your system.
Right.
But at the same time, I say earth. If you actually read the meaning of this word, it's not really that bad. It's just the state of amazement. But you are made to believe, or you have heard people using stupid for someone who is not good. You're made to believe so. So your subconscious mind has not stored the real meaning of it, but the meaning that world has introduced to you. So now you react to it based on your worldly understanding of the word. The gyan, what is? Gayatri knows, I am not stupid. So therefore Gayatri will not react. So what happens is that's what we call going in depths, right? So you
Right.
start going deeper and deeper, and you stop reacting to these things.
Yeah. Do you believe in past lives?
Honestly speaking, who am I to believe or not believe something? I'll tell you, I'll tell you this gameplay of mind, right? Very good question, and I like to answer it very differently. If as a child, my subconscious is trained to listen to these stories, and you ask me the question, do you believe in past life? I would say yes,
Yes.
yes. And if I have grown up in a very scientific environment, well, let's say my parents were scientists, see, that's what you need to understand this. You don't believe or not believe something.
Right.
It's your subconscious.
Yeah.
All this while, do you believe in God? Okay, you've grown up in an environment where you've taught about God all the time. You will say, yes, I believe in God.
Yeah.
Right? So you only come to a point in life where you get certain glimpses of the past life. Now that's when you can say you believe something or not. Other than that, anubhav, everything else is fed into your system.
It's from the subconscious belief.
Exactly. So when you say I believe this or I don't believe this, that's not you.
It's not your experience.
It is not.
Yes.
It is fed into your subconscious mind.
Right.
From what you see, your experiences, your situations. Like for example, when I got into this path, I was living a very different life. A life of any urban, a corporate woman, partying, enjoying. Like I had a different idea about life altogether. And I suddenly Suddenly, out of nowhere, this question comes and I get drifted to another path and I never look back. And then I begin to believe that, yes, this is, I feel more related to this. This is what I want. Now tell me, at this point in time, when you talk about belief or not belief, I was thinking that life is something like this. And then suddenly my perspective shift happened. Then somebody told me that you're not doing it from this life. This is coming from your past life.
Yeah.
Till that time, past life didn't exist for me. But someone said, no, you are not just suddenly drifted.
Yeah.
These are your past samskaras.
Well,
Now, these are either my guru's talking or a learned person talking. So what I do is I start to believe that, okay, yeah, there is a past life. But have I still had an experience of it?
Right.
I still have a belief of it. Because someone I trusted said that to me.
Oh, okay.
So your belief and non-belief is not yours until you experience it. That's what.
If we start looking at life like this, who are we then? We are a construct of all the identities we have been given.
Exactly. That's why I say, Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. Na man ho, na buddhi ho, na ahankar ho, na chitta ho, na jivva ho, na naak ho, na kaan ho, na aag ho, na muh ho. I am ever prevailing consciousness. That's what Nirvana Shatkam tells you. That you are Shivoham Shivam. Everything else is a wave that's coming to you. The worst part is, Gayatri ji, even though I am sharing this with you, I still am very much impacted by those waves. That's Maya. You don't get rid of it. I know within my heart that I'm not this, but that mind that at the disposal of Maya consciously again and again and again makes us identify with these fluctuations. But the sadhana, the time of sadhana, does give you that window again and again. Until that window becomes a door becomes like a big gate, and then everything opens up in front of you, you will still identify with these. So essentially, meditation is not transcending the mind, it stop identifying with it eventually with time. So
Wow.
you have to reduce your identification with the time. I always say that when you say, I am Grisha, why don't you say like this, I am Grisha? Because you identify with the Atma, and this is called the house of Atma, by the way.
It lives here.
Yes, in spirituality, it is said that the heart chakra is the abode of Atma. So you don't say, I am Grisha, you say, I am Grisha.
Grisha, the next question I want to ask you is, how is food connected to how we think?
Have you ever fasted, Gayatri ji?
Yes, I have.
What happens to your mind when you fast?
I've been more productive, actually.
What else happens?
What else?
Let's say that 24-hour window
Mm.
that you're fasting, right? What happens in that window to your mind?
Towards the end or somewhere in between, I actually crave food and I'm longing for food. But then there are few hours in between where I have no distractions and I'm actually being very focused.
Correct, right? You just gave answer to your own question. That's what food does to you, right?
Okay.
So not just the food, but when and how you eat goes along with it. Okay. So what food essentially does to us is, understand, I spoke about the 5 vayus that are there, right? Now these vayus also impact your thoughts. We spoke about it. These vayus on a physical realm is conducting all the functions of the body. On the subtle realms, these work on your thoughts, your mental impressions, your samskaras, or your emotions, right? On the gross level, on the sthul sharir level, we say, they're also conducting all the functions of your body, hormonal, and the other voluntary and involuntary functions in the body. For example, digestion. For example, excretion, assimilation and distribution of the nutrients, breathing, blinking of the eye, speaking, sneezing, breath intaking, breath outgoing, right? All of these gross functions of the body are also conducted by the Vayus according to the yoga. Okay, according to the theory of yoga and understanding of yogic science. Okay, now when you pick the foods which are heavy, which take a lot of time to digest, which also are dull, cooked with a lot of stimulants and spices, cooked with a lot of fats and oils, which are heavy on your digestive system. Think about if your pranic vayus are a bridge between the emotions and the thought, but at the same time also managing the gross functions. Don't you think both of them are related?
Yes.
So if, let's say, you have eaten a meal which is extremely heavy, you will see your mind, rest of the thinking capability, creativity, all the other things will become dull until the food is digested. Why? Because the Vayu, which is digesting the food, now sucking up all the energy and digesting that food in your system, right? Which is also apparently supposed to give you better thoughts, right? At the same time, if you eat something, right, which makes you feel good, right? At that moment, it makes you feel good, but it gets stored in your system as a guilt. We call it fat, stored fat.
Okay.
Right? That's what happens. So stored fat in that moment made you feel good, but when you look yourself in the mirror, then what kind of thoughts come for the same food? For the same food that you've had, that you enjoyed so much. And when you become unhealthy, the idea and thoughts towards the same food starts changing.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Then you start realizing, oh my God, where is that sugar? Where is that salt? Where is that craving that I've had? All of that is sitting on my body, and your thoughts change. So you may think that the food that you're eating is instantly impacting your thought. It is impacting your thoughts by manipulating the vayus, by over consuming them in the first place. The vayus which are supposed to provide you productivity, provide you creativity, intuitiveness, help you evolve. The same vayus are also now more invested in the gross functions, right? And therefore they impact your thoughts. So the food that are heavy makes you feel dull. When you feel dull, obviously you can't think creatively, you can't be productive, you can't be focused. At the same time, you fast one day, you don't give any food. Now your pranic vayus are working in the subtle realm because you gave them a break from the gross world a little bit, right? So now especially digestion takes the maximum amount of energy. I'm letting you know this. Digestion takes the maximum amount of energy in your body, right? So the moment you take a break from the food, you feel more peaceful, more productive, more focused, because now the subtle functions of the vayus become more enhanced.
Okay.
That's what happens. That's why they say, if you're in the path of sadhana, or for that matter, if you really want to live long and have a happy life, eat meals which provide balance between the subtle and the gross function of the vayus, right? So enjoying a heavy meal once in a while, okay, good, no problem, right? It will never give you guilt. Never. But enjoying the same meal every day, at some point in time when the realization come, when you look yourself, your health, your situation, you look yourself in the mirror, is going to give you guilt. The same very food is going to change your thought patterns.
Why do we have cravings then?
We don't have, the other day I conducted a small session on food and mind, and exactly, you don't have craving for food. You actually have craving for three things: salt, fat, and sugar. I'll tell you why. Genetically, as humans were evolving, right? We didn't have surplus of foods like now that we have. There was no vegetation, nothing. We could only depend on the nature and whatever we could find or hunt in that time, right? So first thing first, fat gave us some sort of mental security because it gets stored and is used for a long-term energy requirement. So any fat source that we got at that point in time, that's why we overeat. There's a natural tendency of overeating today. And that's not entirely your fault. Now, don't think that it's not your fault, because your mind's conditioning needs to be reworked, which you are not doing. That's your fault. Genetically, you are carrying and information and memory of storing the food because it was required for the survival. So you store as much as you eat, you store in your system. So when you don't get food, the same can be utilized, right? So that's one thing. Why do you crave for sugar? Sugar was not something that was very naturally available. People used to get it, humans used to get it only from honey and fruits, right? And sugar gives you instant energy. So people needed that instant energy for hunting, because they were everything they were doing physically. So they used to eat a lot of sugary food so that they get some energy to work physically. They did not necessarily get meat. They could not hunt at the times, and they don't have access to grains or anything, right? And that's why, because sometimes consuming honey directly or so much of fruits directly, that sugar helped them at that point in time, right? To get some energy. Likewise, salt also was not easily available. That point in time, people didn't know how to make salt from the salt water of the ocean, right? So salt, whatever little they get, it helps in regulating their nervous system. You see how little bit of salt is required in your food to help your blood pressure and nervous system. So that's why they craved for salt the most, because fat was still given to them in the form of meat. Sugar was still given to them. That's why when you eat a packet of chips, you finish it. And that's what advertising does. It plays with your mind. So every chips ad you see, there is more emphasis on the sound.
Yeah.
Sound. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Because this crunch sound brings the feeling of that craving in you. Okay. And when you eat, so A, satisfaction of the sound, B, the salt put in it.
Okay.
Triggers that genetic information and memory you are carrying. And therefore, it's hard for you to. That's why when you go out, you eat salty foods. Snacks have a lot of salt in it, right? So that's what happens to your system. So you're carrying this genetic information. The problem now is, why do you crave, Gayatri ji? Now, you are not fighting for survival. You have food, you have shelter, you have everything. I said, remember in the beginning, your mind does not know the difference between the real situation and an imaginary situation. You create stress in your body over little things. Now, what mind does is puts you in a survival mode. What you want when you are in survival mode to feel secure and safe? Salt, sugar, fat. Do you crave for sprouts?
No.
I don't. So that's the conditioning of the mind. It's a genetic human history. The problem now is our mind frequently still shifts to the survival mode.
Okay.
And when you start doing yoga, meditation, and mindfulness, the mind does not get into the survival mode very easily. Therefore, very naturally, the cravings will come down. And anyone who's listening to me here and has done this sadhana, has done yoga, will vouch for this. Automatically, effortlessly, cravings come down. Why? The stress that is being built up, which was earlier channelized towards the food, because food gives you this instant feeling of safety. They have another gates of yoga and meditation and these mindfulness practices where the same amount of stress is being released from those gates as opposed to foods.
Okay.
So there are gates. There's always an option B and C for them now.
Okay.
Which yoga and meditation and mindfulness opens. Even the physical exercises, it opens up another channels and gates for the same amount of stress to be released. So then body does not, or mind does not really very quickly shifts to the survival
mode. Okay. Have you ever had this weird thought of leaving all of this and just going off to the mountains?
Many times. Then I look at my husband and he's like, oh. I didn't marry this girl. Now I have to live with this girl.
You got married when you were in the corporate girl era?
Yes. That man has really gone through some other level of consciousness involvement because of me, because he has, in our marriage, like he has seen like me changing drastically, and he's tried to like really accommodate with this. Like imagine, you marrying someone who is at that point in time like sort of marries your thought process, someone who fits right in. Like obviously, but then that changes. There are also talks about the impermanence of everything, right? Like how you believe that this person you are all your life, all my 27 years of life, whatever time I've had, I thought this is me, and then it suddenly changes and I stop identifying with it. Not completely, but yeah, many areas you stop identifying. But the person who's with you is also going through that.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I really hope that would come is, what should a grasta or someone who's married do?
Yeah.
Is I want to tell this to everyone that if you are married, your marriage is as much as important as your sadhana. Marriage is your sadhana. So even though such sort of thoughts come, I am a grasta, I love my husband. I think because of him, I am in this path in the first place. If that man had not come to my life, I wouldn't have come on this path. So he's very much a part of my sadhana. He is my sadhana. I often call him, he is my Shiva. He is my Shiva. So that's what a grasta should do, man or woman. The other day, my eyes welled up. I heard Premanand Babaji's talking about कि प्यार ही तो करना है, अपने पार्टनर में क्यों नहीं दिखता तुम्हें भगवान? If you can love the God and if you can love your partner with the same feeling, you will see God in your partner as well. So if there is a God, it's in your partner only. And that's what I like really deeply connected to. And I felt that, yeah, one of the perspective shifts I've had on this journey is I stopped looking at my husband as a human being. I started looking at him as like, he's my Shiva.
Wow.
You know, he's my, because the way he has been with me on this journey, even though going through so many fluctuations himself, seeing me, and he's still being there with me, only God can do that.
It's so beautiful to actually hear this from somebody who's on a completely different path, right? Like path to seek the truth. Generally, people want to give up on all the worldly things,
Yeah.
but you say it's just as equally important as your sadhana. Why do you think these days marriages don't sustain for a really long time? What do you think has fundamentally like shaken up the marriage system right now?
I really feel that again, there is always a conflict between your conscious and subconscious mind when it comes to a human being, right?
Mm.
So your conscious mind paints a picture of the person you want, right? But subconscious had always a different idea. The conflict is not because somebody is bad or somebody is good. The conflict is because this conflict is inside us. The kind of person you want to marry is a picture painted by your conscious mind based on what your surface level likes, dislikes are, based on the financial statuses nowadays, based on many other impermanent things.
Right.
Your subconscious does not lie and does not look for impermanent things in the first place. That's when the disagreements happen. You know, so many situations come where, let's say, your conscious mind said, I want to marry a very successful woman. What if that woman is not successful tomorrow? What if she fails? You know, she's not that person. So then what will happen? The subconscious will begin to rise.
Okay.
And say, no, I actually didn't want to marry a successful woman. I wanted to marry a woman who loves me. Nonetheless.
Okay.
So that's a conflict. Is not because humans are changing or because someone is good or bad. It's because your own clarity is fading off.
Okay.
We are so driven with the external world that, again, I'll bring that example to you. We have stopped at differentiating between a casual, intercourse over a night and an intimate, true love.
Yeah.
Right? So there is a difference between two, and I think that's where it's because of our own conflicts the marriages don't work.
Right. So when we work on ourselves, the marriages will work on itself.
Yeah, trust me. Now, that being said, that is the work of both the partners. It's
True.
not like, okay, I am working and the other partner is not working. No,
Right.
like, so that has to be me and my husband in a way. We are poles apart. Poles apart. Our idea of spirituality is different. Our choices are, even though our eating habits are different, what we do in our lives, our paths to career is different. But both of us share the same love, the same respect for each other, the same faith and trust that we have. these are the things we saw in each other when we met. Both of us were absolutely nowhere in life when we met, and both of us are together standing on the same step of the ladder.
Wow.
Both of us left our jobs to follow our passion and ambition. Both of us manifested this life together. And we made it happen. God made it happen because we had faith, love, and trust. Now that does not come at a cost.
That's true. That's true.
You can have a big wedding, but still not have a marriage. There's a difference between the two. That my husband taught me.
That's so
That
profound.
Grisha, we can have a grand wedding, but then marriage is not what wedding is. Wedding
Wow.
is just an event. Marriage is a bond of life. He's a very evolved person.
So when we were talking about the yogis, you mentioned something very beautifully when their Mooladhara chakra is open and very
Yeah.
strong. I mean, can you explain what chakras are and what role they play in our life?
So you must have seen a diagram or a picture of
Yes.
chakra where they show that the chakras are, they are aligned along with the spine. Those are indicative areas, I would like to say.
Mm.
To just understand and help people focus in that area. It's not necessary there.
Okay.
It's an indicative area, right? So chakras are, I'll tell you what nadis are, and this is all yogic science. So anyone who is trying to understand this from a modern science point of view will not
Okay.
understand, because this is not an intellectual understanding, it's an experiential understanding. So nadis are the carriers of the prana in the body. Prana we call the vital energy, right? And it's much more than that, but just in simple words to understand, prana is the electricity that is running your thoughts, your mind, your emotions, your consciousness, your intellect, every existence of your being. The same Mahaprana is the universal energy. Like for example, sun, heat in the outer world is present in different forms. Within you, it is the Jataragni.
Okay.
Right? The digestive fire is essentially a reflection of the sun within your own system. So that's also a part of Mahaprana within your body. So that's what we mean by prana. So prana is running in, just like how blood runs through veins and vessels in the body. Prana also runs through different nadis, right? There are 72,000 nadis in your body running from one point to the other. Now, chakras are a place where these nadis get entangled, so they cross.
Okay.
So the accumulation of the energy is apparently higher in that area.
Mm.
So that's what we call chakra,
Mm.
right? So wherever they coincide and meet, that's where they get entangled, and the energy accumulation is higher in those areas.
Mm.
So concentrating on those areas will further expand the energy. And once the energy expands, so every chakra has a certain capacity. Like a bulb, a 200 volt bulb can only take a 200 volt,
Correct.
right, energy. And if it exceeds, it's going to move up somewhere. Either the bulb will burst, or if you have another bulb connected to it, it is going to pass on that energy. Likewise, when the energy starts rising through, with the help of the sadhana, with the help of the consciousness rising, the Mooladhara has certain capacity. Once that capacity is met, that's what we call chakra awakening, by the way. Like the full capacity of that chakra is met.
Okay.
Now the energy will start rising up, rising up, rising up, rising up, rising up. It rises up otherwise also. But when the full capacity is met, that's when we call the awakening of the chakra.
Okay.
That's when we say that the chakra is mastered,
Mm.
right? उसको पूरी तरीके से साध लिया गया है, उसको मास्टर कर लिया गया. अब all the functions, the gross, the transcendental, the mental, emotional functions of the chakra are now in the control of the sadhak.
Okay.
Right now they were controlling you, but once you master that, now
What blocks the chakras?
they are not blocked, by the way, right?
Okay.
So blocked in the sense your consciousness is right now at the lower chakra. It's not that the others are not working.
Okay.
How did you feel that moment of bliss?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
How did you feel that?
Yeah.
Now, if you say, oh, my other chakras are blocked, no, they are operational, but your awareness is down.
Ah.
So, what yoga meditation essentially does is it raises your awareness
Okay.
from one chakra to the other to the other. So, that's how it starts rising. The consciousness starts rising,
Okay.
in a simple word. So if there is a wire connecting all the bulbs, you would see If the electricity or the power is less, it will light one bulb.
Correct.
That too very faintly.
Mm.
Like that.
Right.
Once that energy starts increasing, it will light one bulb, then the second bulb, then the third bulb, the fourth bulb, and the last bulb. So that's what we call raising the prana.
Mm.
Once prana starts raising, it will start lightening all the bulb eventually, one by one. So that's how your consciousness evolves, your thought patterns evolve, the way you perceive the outer world changes, the way you perceive the inner world also changes. And physical health, fighting diseases, tejas, ojas, optimal functioning, long life, all that is just a byproduct.
Okay.
Now that's what we need to think about. So yoga, you asked me one of the myths. Yoga essentially is not designed, essentially in the traditional form, was not designed to fight illnesses or diseases. These are the gifts along the way.
And these just happen as a byproduct of wow.
So the yogis didn't do yoga to cure diseases.
True.
They did to reach the higher
Truth.
level of consciousness.
Right.
That long age, that youthfulness, and all of that is something that they got on the way as a gift.
And it's so misunderstood that people run behind this, not understanding the true essence of it.
हाँ मतलब कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है इफ यू देखो कैसे भी कर रहे हो योगा बहुत अच्छी बात है आई ऑलवेज से आई नेवर से ओ नो यू आर नॉट डूइंग इट फॉर हायर कॉन्शियसनेस देयरफॉर यू आर नॉट that's judgment.
Right.
That's very bad. What I'm saying is, even if you're doing this, just know the fact that there is a higher path. There is a higher path. Just be aware of it.
Okay.
That this is not it. This physical fitness is not it. It's a byproduct. That's
lovely. As we come to the end of the podcast, Grisha, I've had such an amazing and insightful conversation, and I will remember this conversation for a really, really long time. But for all the viewers who are watching this, what would your message be for them?
My only message to everyone is, people say, what should we do? What should we do? What is the purpose? How should I? Always say, try to be the human that nature created. If you can do that, you are giving the greatest gift to the humanity. Imagine, go back in time, human had the desire to evolve consciously. Now today we have become so comfortable. Even though we have all the amenities, we are becoming more and more miserable. More and more miserable, right? So what we need, all of us, is to become the human being that nature and God had created, right? Not the Maya and the social world had created. So anyone who's listening to this, my only and only request is, don't do yoga because you have to do it. Do it so that you can become your optimal self, right? Trust me, each and every human being is born with certain duty, certain purpose. That is why every human is different. You are different. I am different. This person is different. That person is different. And by birth, we are different. Not just the way we look. Even our nature, even our prakriti. You are good at something. That person is good at something. That person is good at something by birth, by nature. Why do you think nature has gifted you that? Why do you think God has gifted you that one capability, one uniqueness, what certain blend? So identify that blend and hold on to that and find the purpose. And yoga, mindfulness, sadhana is something that guides you. Guides you. It protects you from the external fluctuations, takes you inside and connects you that one instinct, that one character you were born with. Because the real purpose of life lies in that.
Yeah.
It lies in you were born with it.
Yeah.
You just forgot on the way what you were born to do. Each one of you were born with a purpose. We forgot that on the way because we got derailed. We got influenced. Maya did its job really well. Of course, it always does. She wins over our hearts and minds. But what essentially yoga does is brings you inward And if you really want to be, see, I'm trying to lure you. If you really want to be successful, then going inward is the way. Is the way. Trust me. So try to go inward as much as possible. Don't do yoga for, even if you think that you are healthy, very good, I'm very proud of you, but you still need yoga. You still need mindfulness. You still need to go inward, right? So do it so that you can find your purpose and you can benefit the humanity and society in a better way. That's also, be the human that nature created. I always say that.
I am in a way kind of not very happy that the conversation has come to an end. But thank you so much, Grisha. I mean, I have no words to say. What a brilliant conversation this was, purely for us to just dive deep into most of the questions. I mean, like you said, be in the flow. I'm like, half the questions have not even asked because I felt something else needed to be asked at this point of time, so that it would just benefit me and so many other people who are watching this. Thank you once again for doing this.
I would luckily take all of these places if I believe that it is me answering these questions, but I will bow down to my gurus, to this sadhana, most importantly, which has enabled us to touch certain areas of life and share the anubhav. So all we can do as human being is not share the knowledge. When you share, this is just an information being imparted, right? But when you speak from your heart, you speak from your anubhav. So I'm really happy that sadhana has given me a little bit of anubhav to even express the same knowledge that has come down from our gurus in some way or the other. We are always failing at doing justice to this because we are very much ahankari. But I feel we have immense grace of our, gurus, and especially this sadhana and, yoga and scriptures. Wow. Like, we are able to talk about it. The fact that you are able to talk about it and you're using the words to express it is a big thing. It's a big thing. So thank you so much for this wonderful conversation that we've had.
Thank you, Grisha. Thank you.